In the Vale, Peter faced another crisis. Lisa's jealousy boiled over when she discovered him talking softly with Sansa on the balcony. Lisa flew into a rage, accusing them of carrying on a romantic affair. She seized Sansa by the arm, dragged her to the moon door, shrieking that she would throw the girl out into the sky. Sansa sobbed in terror. Peter intervened, speaking gently to Lisa, telling her that he had only ever loved one woman. She relaxed for a moment, thinking he meant her. But Peter said, "Only Cat," and shoved Lisa through the moon door to her death. Her scream echoed briefly before it was lost to the wind. Sansa collapsed in shock, staring at Peter in horror and relief. Within moments, the Lady of the Vale was gone, leaving Peter as the presumed protector of young Robin Arryn. When the Vale Lords demanded an explanation, Baelish summoned his smoothest lies. He claimed Lisa had become distraught and suicidal, that she threatened Sansa, that he had tried to save her but failed. Sansa corroborated the story, though she found it difficult to speak. The lords were uncertain, but without strong proof of murder, they relented. Baelish took charge, reaffirming his vow to protect Robin and uphold the Vale's neutrality. Some lords grumbled, but most concluded that the boy needed a firm hand, and Baelish seemed better suited than the hysterical Lisa had been. With Lisa's death, Peter Baelish became Lord Protector of the Vale, free to shape it however he wished. This was the moment he had long planned for. He set about reorganizing the Vale's administration, placing key positions in the hands of men loyal or beholden to him. He doled out small lands and titles to those who would guard his back, forging alliances through reward and fear. He also continued to nurture Robin, helping the boy develop at least a semblance of a leader's bearing. If the child stammered or wavered, Baelish prompted him with subtle suggestions. Over time, the Vale Lords found themselves deferring to Peter, who was effectively the region's ruler. The Eyrie, perched high above, was his seat of power, and at his side was Sansa Stark, quietly enduring, no longer a mere prisoner but not truly free. She was uncertain whether Peter was her benefactor or captor, or both. Word from the north eventually arrived that the Boltons had claimed Winterfell and that they were hunting down any remaining Stark loyalists. Peter saw a glimmer of opportunity. If he could maneuver Sansa into a position to reclaim the north, her claim would challenge the Boltons, and the Vale's knights could march under her banner. That might cause further fractures in the realm, or it might be a direct path to establishing Sansa as Lady of Winterfell, and Peter as the power behind her. War had taken so many twists, but it was not finished yet. He began sending ravens to certain northern houses, discreetly suggesting that the trueborn daughter of Eddard Stark might soon reappear. He tested their responses, gauging who still held loyalty to the Stark name and who was firmly in the Bolton camp. The results were mixed, but some houses, Manderley, Umber, Serwyn, remained defiantly Stark at heart. Peter nurtured those connections. All the while, King's Landing continued to unravel. Cersei's misrule led to a rise in fanaticism among the faith militant, culminating in her own arrest by the High Sparrow. Marjorie Tyrell was also arrested on charges of perjury and other trumped-up sins. Tommen was a boy king, too weak to control the situation. The realm was weary of war, yet unrest festered everywhere. Peter watched from afar, occasionally sending a polite letter to the capital, reminding the Queen Regent, or whoever currently held power, that the Vale stood ready to assist if certain conditions were met. He offered no direct involvement, content to let the capital rot until it was ripe for him to swoop in. He found himself focusing more and more on the north, seeing a clearer route to power there. He arranged for Sansa to be betrothed to Harold Harding, a distant relative of the Arryns, grooming him as a fallback plan should he need a legitimate male figure to lead the Vale's knights. But in secret, Peter told Sansa that she need only endure the show of betrothal until the time was right. He teased her with the notion that she might eventually marry someone of her choosing, or perhaps ascend to rule the North herself as Lady Stark, with the full backing of the Vale. She never expressed open enthusiasm for such cunning, but the spark of pride in her eyes showed she was not indifferent to the possibility of reclaiming her birthright. Peter let that spark grow, hoping to shape her into a willing partner in intrigue. When news came that Stannis Baratheon had marched north to confront the Boltons, Baelish was intrigued. If Stannis weakened the Boltons, that might open a path for Sansa's claim. Or if the Boltons triumphed, the North might remain locked under their rule for a time. Yet the people there despised the Boltons, which could become tinder for a future uprising. Petyr considered sending a small contingent of Vale Knights to tip the scales, but he deemed it premature. Stannis might lose. Best to hold his strength in reserve until the victor was clear. This was the essence of Petyr's strategy. Never commit too heavily until he could be sure of success. Let others bleed, then step in at the perfect moment. In the Vale itself, Petyr tightened his control, weaving alliances of marriage and trade among the lesser houses. He used gold from his brothels and from new taxes on Gulltown's trade to fund small projects that pleased the local lords. Improved roads, new market stalls, modest fortifications. Each improvement was credited to Robin Arryn's rule, but everyone knew who truly guided the Vale. Petyr also kept a watchful eye on the Aerys wards, especially Sansa. He made certain she lacked the means to flee, though he allowed her some limited freedoms to keep her content. He was well aware that her trust in him was fragile at best. But so long as she feared the Boltons and the Lannisters more, she would remain his reluctant ally. Winter deepened, blanketing the high passes in snow. The Vale was spared the worst of the warfare raging in the Riverlands and the north, thanks to its natural defenses. Ravens brought scattered news of battles lost and won. Sometimes, rumors arrived that Daenerys Targaryen had conquered distant cities across the sea and might one day return with dragons. Petyr hardly knew if such rumors were credible, but he filed them away all the same. The realm was so fractured that even a Targaryen invasion might find success. And if that day ever came, Petyr would be ready to shift allegiance if it proved advantageous. He took satisfaction in the knowledge that he was no longer the mockingly named Littlefinger, who stood at court waiting on the whims of greater lords. He commanded the Vale's armies, held the allegiance of important knights like Ser Brynden Tully, the Blackfish, who had sought refuge there, and influenced the politics of the North through Sansa. Though he had once served the Lannisters, he no longer needed their favor. He was a power in his own right, and yet he hungered for more. The Iron Throne remained the ultimate seat of authority, but Petyr never wanted to simply sit there as a target for every dagger in the realm. He wanted influence that transcended any single seat. He wanted to be the man who pulled the strings of kings and queens alike. In quiet moments, he sometimes reflected on Eddard Stark. The man's death had been the pivot for so many of Petyr's successes. If Ned had lived, the realm might have found stability under his honorable leadership, and Petyr would never have ascended so far. Ned's honor had been his undoing. Now, years later, Petyr sat in the Eyrie with Ned's daughter under his protection, or captivity, depending on how one looked at it. It was an irony too delicious to ignore. He would whisper to Sansa about Ned's kindness, how the realm missed men of such principle, how cruelly he had been cut down. And Sansa, tears in her eyes, would nod, though she surely suspected Petyr's complicity. She could not prove it, and even if she did, what recourse did she have? Petyr was her only shield against the terrors of the outside world. The realm's shifting alliances continued to provide opportunities. When the Iron Bank of Bravos grew impatient with the Lannisters' mounting debts, Petyr quietly opened a line of communication with them, offering favorable terms if they decided to fund the Vale's expansions. He proposed that the Vale could help repay some of the crown's debts if certain trade privileges were granted. He also hinted that should the bank need an enforcer for any outstanding loans, the Vale's knights might be available, for a price. It was all part of his grand strategy to become indispensable not just to local lords but to foreign powers as well. He also nudged the Vale lords to consider sending an emissary to the north. A cunning mission could sow dissent against the Boltons and rally any remaining Stark loyalists to Sansa. He coached Sansa on how to behave if such a mission succeeded in retaking Winterfell. She would present herself as the trueborn heir, denounce the kinslaying and atrocities committed by the Boltons, and grant clemency to any house that bent the knee. Petyr would manage the negotiations and ensure that the Vale's knights retained a privileged position in the North's new order. The outcome might be a newly unified Northvale bloc, stronger than any southern kingdom. And from there, who knew what might follow? Sansa listened to these elaborate plans with a guarded expression. Sometimes she questioned whether it was right to manipulate the northern houses into more conflict. But Peter reminded her that the Boltons were the ones who had betrayed her family, that they murdered her brother and mother at the Twins, and that restoring House Stark required ruthless action. He could see the war inside her, the clash of her father's honorable teachings and the cruel lessons the world had forced upon her. Over time, Sansa grew more pragmatic, more willing to entertain Peter's counsel. She began to see that in a realm so full of cunning and treachery, naive honesty meant an early grave. Peter silently congratulated himself for shaping her perspective. He was forging Sansa into a player, not a pawn. Far to the west, the Lannisters struggled to maintain unity. Without Tywin's iron grip, infighting broke out. Kevan Lannister tried to hold the family together, while Cersei made blunders driven by paranoia, and Jaime was busy with personal quests. The Tyrells, chafing under Cersei's attempts to rule, retreated to Highgarden with Marjorie's pride injured by her humiliations at the hands of the Faith militant. King Tommen was a puppet in all but name. The small folk starved, blaming the crown's debts and the failing harvests. Rebels and brigands sprouted in the crownlands. Peter watched from the Vale, waiting for the moment when that tension might break. Perhaps if the capital grew too weak, he could march in under the banner of the Vale to restore order, installing a pliable regent and controlling the capital from within. Or perhaps he would let it burn and set his sights on forging a new kingdom in the north, using Sansa's name as rallying cry. Each day brought fresh possibilities. He was careful, though. A single misstep could bring it all crashing down. He had to maintain a veneer of loyalty to the Iron Throne while quietly nurturing the seeds of Northern rebellion. He had to keep the Vale Lords appeased yet reliant on him. He had to keep Sansa under control yet make her believe that freedom lay in the path he charted. The balancing act was perilous, and he relished it. This was the reason he had orchestrated Eddard Stark's downfall, manipulated the Lannisters, and brokered alliances with the Tyrells, so that he could hold the fate of regions in his palm. Occasionally, he visited the garden balcony in the Eyrie where he had killed Lisa. He would stand at the moon door's edge, staring down into the dizzying drop. The wind whipped at his cloak, the sky an endless expanse of cold blue. No matter how high he climbed, he reminded himself, a single slip could send him plunging into darkness. That was the reality of the game he played, yet he found it exhilarating. The higher the climb, the more thrilling the risk. One evening, as winter winds moaned around the tall towers, Peter sat by the fireplace with Sansa, reviewing maps of the north. He pointed out the key strongholds, White Harbor, the Dreadfort, Winterfell. He showed her the passes through the mountains and the choke points near Moat Cailin. He explained how a well-led force from the Vale might bypass certain defenses if timed with a northern uprising. Sansa watched, her eyes lingering on the name Winterfell, her memories stirring. She asked if they would truly fight to reclaim it, or if this was another trick. Peter leaned in, his voice soft and reassuring. "My sweet Sansa, I have dreamed of seeing you restored to your rightful place. The North needs a Stark, and you are the Stark it deserves." The girl trembled slightly, uncertain, but he could see the yearning in her eyes. She wanted to believe. He gave her a gentle smile. Outside, the realm groaned under the weight of a long war and a gathering winter, but Peter Baelish sat warm in the Eyrie, orchestrating events like a musician tuning the strings of a harp. He had shaped this new order from the moment Ned Stark arrived in King's Landing, from the day he first planted seeds of discord between the Starks and Lannisters, from the betrayal in the throne room, from the hush around Ned's final moments on the Great September steps. And now, the chaos that had ensued all across the Seven Kingdoms was a testament to his skill. Great houses lay broken, kings had risen and died, dragons might yet return, but Peter Baelish remained. He rose from his seat by the fire, glancing at Sansa one last time before walking to the window. The moonlight bathed the valley far below, silvering the mountain slopes. The Vale was quiet tonight, the wind singing softly across the peaks. In that hush, Peter allowed himself a moment of reflection. He had begun his climb as the mockery of the Tullus, a boy from the Fingers with no name to speak of. Now he held power that lords of ancient lineage could only dream of. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with lurking perils, yet he found no fear within himself, only ambition and a sense of calm determination. He would continue to move each piece on the board, step by step, betraying whomever he needed, allying with whomever served his purpose. His final goal was something beyond even the Iron Throne, beyond mere crowns. It was the unassailable certainty that he, and he alone, shaped the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. He closed the window shutters and turned away. On the table, the maps of the North awaited further scrutiny. Tomorrow, he would write letters to White Harbor, test the waters for a potential uprising. He would direct certain spies to ascertain the true condition of Winterfell. He might feed a false rumor to a northern bannerman, letting the rumor drift back to the Boltons, sowing distrust among them. And all the while, he would keep an ear to the ground in King's Landing, perhaps readying to exploit Cersei's next mistake. Everything was a matter of timing. Everything was a matter of little pushes and pulls in the right places. With Eddard Stark's death, the first domino had fallen. Many more had followed, but the chain reaction was far from complete. Thus, the man called Littlefinger stood poised above the realm, a faint smile on his lips, as if amused by a jest only he could hear. That jest was the game itself, the puppet dance of kings, queens, knights, and lords, all believing themselves masters of their fate, while Peter Baelish tugged unseen strings. He had set it in motion when Ned Stark arrived in King's Landing, and Ned's fall had been the first chord of the melody. Now the symphony had grown into a grand cacophony, with each discordant note offering Peter another opportunity to climb. Step by step, rung by rung, he ascended. And, as he liked to say in his rare, unguarded moments, chaos was not a pit. It was a ladder.